We're continuing on with our exploration of individual causes of delinquency, which now brings us to rational choice theory, which assumes that people want to achieve certain things and that their actions will be based on whether the circumstances exist that will allow them to get away with the act. And just like Bentham's theory, it has the same fundamental flaw in that it's based on the idea that people calculate and fully understand their own interests. And as I said in the previous slide, with what we know today, particularly about children and adolescents, we know that they don't necessarily understand why they do things, nor do they carefully calculate their interests. In fact, to some extent, the opposite is true for delinquent youth. Often their actions are based on emotion and impulsivity. While we know today that rational choice may not be the best theory for understanding juvenile delinquency, this theory, just like utilitarianism, was very popular when it was first discussed. The fundamental flaw, of course, is that rational choice theory cannot account for all of human behavior. It's particularly flawed in thinking about youth and also behaviors relating to addiction, as we know that addiction is driven by physiological issues and not rational thought processes. And, of course, the idea of rational decision-making does not take into account the social forces and social issues that contemporary theories would take into account. We'll switch over now to talking about the positivist school, which considers what are known as constitutional theories. The very first of the positivists was a scientist named Cesar Lombroso. This scientist is considered the father of criminology because he was the first researcher to study the causes of crime in anything that resembled even a remotely scientific method. Lombroso patently rejected the entire school of rational theory and instead built new theories based on psychiatry, social Darwinism, and what was known then as degeneration theory. He studied the characteristics of many criminals, observing characteristics and categorizing the individuals according to these physical traits. He developed theories that had their basis in evolutionary ideas and concepts. And remember, this is during the same time that Charles Darwin is developing his popular theories on evolution of species. So it makes perfect sense why the theories that Lombroso was using to explain criminal behavior might be based on these types of arguments during this period of time. As I said, Lombroso cataloged physical characteristics, things like the face, the shape of the head, and bodily abnormalities. He called certain people atavistic, meaning that they were throwbacks to more primitive types of people, less sophisticated. His theories were based on the idea that criminals were savages and different from the population at large. He believed that the born criminal could be anatomically identified by such items as a sloping forehead, ears of unusual size, asymmetry of the face, excessive length of the arms, asymmetry of the cranium, and other physical stigmata. His theories were embraced, then later disproved, but these kinds of constitutional theories are still used in some areas of study. Following on the heels of Lombroso was Charles Goring. He wrote The English Convict, a Statistical Study, one of the most comprehensive criminological works of its time. It was first published in 1913 and relied on data collected on 96 different traits of each of over 3,000 English convicts. He ultimately concluded, quote, "The physical and mental constitution of both criminal and law-abiding persons of the same age, stature, class, and intelligence are identical. There is no such thing as an anthropological criminal type," unquote. Thus, Goring completely refuted Lombroso's work. But he did also find that there was, and this is a quote from his works, an indisputable fact that there is a physical, mental, and moral type of normal person who tends to be convicted of a crime. That is to say, our evidence conclusively shows that on average the criminal of English prisons is markedly differentiated by defective physique, as measured by stature and body weight, by defective mental capacity, unquote. Goring went on to argue that one of the ways to combat crime was to regulate the reproduction of those degrees of constitutional qualities, meaning those qualities were feeble-mindedness, inebriety, epilepsy, and the social instinct. So while Goring refutes Lombroso's findings, Goring has some symmetry here in which he believed that there is something physical about the individual, and the argument is developed that social policy should then consider social engineering through eugenics. And just so you know, at this time, this is the very beginning of the eugenics movement in Europe. And then Ernest Houghton is the first of the American criminologists, and his work was based heavily on comparative anatomy, meaning that he used a comparison of physical characteristics to create classifications. And his focus was on racial differences. His work in the area of criminology has been highly criticized, though, for being circular in logic, in that he stated that the physical characteristics of criminals were the actual cause of their criminal propensities.